I made a decision right then. I would just give up. Hey, how's it going? You're watching the Green Dream Project, and this is Jessica. It's been a few months now since we've started our first off-grid desert garden, and I wanted to give you an update. Now, this garden has a special story to it, and it's connected to my own life story in a surprising way. So let's go take a look. Once upon a time, about 20 years ago, and 2,000 miles from where I stand today, I sat in a dark room, thinking about giving up on life. I felt helpless, hopeless, worthless, and trapped, like a caged animal. But then something changed. I realized that my cage was mostly of my own making. Surely, if I could design this prison, then I could design some way out of it. So I set to work, dreaming, searching, planning, and I found a way of life that gave me a greater sense of hope, meaning, freedom, connection, and control over my own path. Central to that way of life was the concept of having a closer connection to the food I eat, knowing what I put into my body, and having a greater responsibility and control over my health and well-being. One of the goals that Jim and I have for our homestead is to produce most of the food that we eat. So when we moved out here, I knew that I wanted to start a garden as soon as possible. While Jim was focused on securing our off-grid water source, I set my focus on preparing a garden space. I dug trenches and set posts, buried mesh, and we built a garden with walls and a roof. Then I worked on preparing the garden beds in a way that would conserve water. It was going to be the ultimate off-grid desert garden, one that minimized pest damage, maximize water efficiency while protecting plants from the heat. By the time the garden was ready for planting, we were well into the heat of the Arizona summer. It was June and the rainy season hadn't started yet, so it was very hot and very dry. Not ideal growing conditions. But we planted some seeds and transplanted some starts. We had vining plants, including a grape, and various vegetables, flowers, and herbs. With the addition of some shade cloth, as well as plenty of mulch and clay pot irrigation, the plants seemed downright comfortable. And our garden was off to a good start. In July, the rains came. It was a joyful time. We caught rain until our water tanks overflowed. The barren desert sprang into life. Grasses that had been sitting dormant all year started growing. Brown became green, and wildflowers of every color adorned the fields. Dragonflies appeared, and they darted back and forth in the morning light, and toads sang their songs of romance after the evening rain. In the garden, mushrooms popped their gray-capped heads out of the mulch, and new seeds sprouted, while other plants began flowering. Then they came. Crickets, grasshoppers, inchworms, leaf miners, and aphids, and more aphids. A few smaller plants succumbed to the onslaught right away, and things really looked grim for the rest of the plants as they got sucked, munched, and gnawed into oblivion. It was around this time that we faced a small storm of frustrations and disappointments. From the death of an animal to financial worries and multiple vehicle breakdowns. Things were just not going as planned, and I started to feel overwhelmed. The garden struggles were particularly discouraging for me. I mean, I wanted to know that I had what it took to grow food to feed ourselves on our homestead. Plus, it was painful to see my little plant babies getting eaten alive. For the first time since starting this new way of life, thoughts of quitting entered my mind. And I might have just pushed those thoughts aside and struggled on, but I paused. This off-grid homesteading journey had been about being self-reliant and taking control over my life. And yet, no matter how much I planned or how hard I worked, there would always be aspects of life that were just beyond my control. So, what if I did quit? I made a decision right then. I would just give up. I would give up my expectations of how my garden was supposed to look or be. I would give up on trying to fight all the bad bugs that were eating my plants. I would give up my fear of losing plants. And I would give up the idea of trying to look like I knew what I was doing. One day, after a rainstorm, I found a puddle of tadpoles. I scooped some up before the puddle had a chance to dry out, and I took them home. I made a little pond for them in the garden. After learning they ate aphids, I would spray some aphids off a leaf and put them in the little tadpole pond and watch the feeding frenzy begin. It also just so happens that chickens love soft, juicy caterpillars. And whenever I noticed one, I would pluck it off the plant, and Chaska the chicken was more than happy to dispatch of it for me. So aside from that, I had pretty much taken a back seat to gardening. I had mostly become an observer, kind of a student. In fact, I was spending more time just observing and less time doing. I was taking a break and stepping back to just see what happened next. And what happened next was amazing. When I gave up on having clean-looking, pristine leaves, eggs laid on those leaves from predatory insects hatched, and the larvae started devouring aphids left and right. Other insects came, as well as more spiders. An incredible drama was unfolding before me. One that I might have missed if I wasn't paying attention. It was a terrible, yet beautiful dance of nature. On a small scale, life and death and things eating other things. I saw patterns beginning to emerge, and an order in what seemed initially like chaos. Everything has its seasons and its cycles, and within that, it became apparent that nature was trying to find a sort of balance. Most of the plants in the garden, which I thought were goners for sure, began to bounce back after they were relieved of their attackers. It was truly beautiful. And the time I would have spent working to combat insects, I spent marveling at the beauty and harmony in nature. I realized that to really enjoy life, I needed to have balance. To not only hold on to my goals and work towards them, but to be willing to let go sometimes and just trust. To find this harmonious place in the ebb and flow of life and be aware of the seasons of things. Not just in the natural world around me, but in my own life as well. Sometimes doing, sometimes thinking, and sometimes just being. And staying connected and engaged with all the life around me. Not just caught up in my own plans and schemes, but knowing that everything has its own intentions and its own path in life. And trying to work with them in a harmonious way instead of always trying to struggle against them. Well, I hope you liked my garden story. Of course, the story isn't over yet. In fact, it's just beginning. We have a lot more gardening coming up and a lot more going on with the homestead. So stay tuned for that. I really appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.